The Long Way Home, Chapter 25, camped. He couldn't let it happen again. He couldn't fail again. Vincent wasn't properly equipped to drop to all fours to really run. But he was a doggo on a light world. Vincent was more than a broken old man. He was a man with children who depended on him. And he'd get to those kids if he had to kill his way to them. He'd kill every last thing in his way if he had to. Hot breath streamed from his teeth, his ears laid back in the wind of his passing, and his canine nose caught the scent of Jason and Isis Magdalene lingering on the stony riverbank. His fur bristled from the nape of his neck to the base of his tail beneath his clothes. Stone shifted with each clattering, loping stride beneath his boots. Vincent's heart thundered against his ribs as he nearly saw the scent he was following with his wild, furious eyes. He couldn't fail again. Not again. The high-pitched whine of landing craft filled the air, and one such craft swooped low into the shadow valley above him to come to a sliding stop on the gravel before him. Vincent didn't even register what kind of people the grub victims had been before he shot them. The landing craft's engines pitched upwards, and Vincent lined his Magac pistol up to where he guessed the pilot sat and fired. The view screen shattered, and the craft careened off wildly as Vincent ran on without breaking stride. He couldn't fail again. Not again. Vincent suddenly veered away from the riverbank with skidding, sliding steps, drawing by instinct and a faint scent in the wind. The George boy was in trouble. Jeep was in trouble. Jason was in trouble. Vincent's self-appointed nephew was in trouble. Vincent snarled at the aging bones and ordered himself to pick up the pace. He was beyond words, beyond being able to cry out in any particular way. Each hot exhalation held its own silent prayer. "Oh God, make my feet swift. O Lord, make my senses keen. O Christ, make my aim true. O Father, keep my family safe." He couldn't fail again. Not again. In the distance, Vincent could hear a familiar soft crack rolling up the shadow valley between the rolling hills he was loping through. The sound of his old R&I surplus boarding shotgun being fired in quick succession. There was no accounting for the sudden burst of speed that propelled Vincent towards that sound, mingled with the light puffing of pneumatic weapons, likely some kind of dart gun. The damn grubs were trying to take his Jason alive, to make him yet another host. Vincent rounded the hillside, a scene of carnage came into view, and he leveled his Magac on an Axark grub host. The polymer stock of the R&I boarding shotgun bucked against the boy's shoulder, and he wore a snarl that mingled pity, disgust, and fury on his face. Jason pulled the trigger again and sent hundreds of tiny flechettes through another teenage Axark grub victim. He did his best to ignore the distressed cry of horror yet another ruby-eyed spray brought from his companion behind him. He had promised her. It didn't matter how much keeping Isis Magdalene safe frightened her. He had promised her. George never breaks his word. "Let's move," he shouted as he spun on his heel and let go of the forward grip of the crab Isis Magdalene by the wrist once more. You've slain them," she cried again, and Jason hauled her along. Jason snapped, "It's an improvement on what the grubs did to them." Isis Magdalene might have intended to say something, but only managed a startled yelp as she stumbled and was kept from falling only by Jason's grip on her wrist. Another 20 yards at a sprint or so, and Jason halted, raced to catch Isis Magdalene so she wouldn't tumble onto her face, and came about face with a shotgun in hand. The 4 dozen remaining pursuers had gained on him. Breathe in, let it out, squeeze. There were 47 of them left, again and again and again. He reduced his enemies by 1. He thought he saw a couple stumble and fall at the back of the pack, but he couldn't stop for a better look. A reduction of half a dozen was enough to get the pursuers to take cover and return fire with their dart guns again. It was time to spin on his heel and sprint a little closer to the long way again. "By the Emperor Unchained," Isis Magdalene moaned as she stumbled to keep pace with Jason. Jason didn't bother to answer her. He could console her later. Now he was concerned with getting her back to the ship safely. He could worry about apologies and dignity later. He had promised. They didn't have much time before whatever mind was controlling the grub hosts realized his extensions weren't being shot anymore, so Jason sprinted as swiftly as his young feet could carry him. The creeping brush snapped and crackled beneath the tread of their shoes. The chill air boiled in Jason's lungs. Sweat slicked the back of his neck beneath his traditional braid. And still, he could sense rather than hear that the enemy had gained on them again. Once again, he released Isis Magdalene's wrist and spun in place. He shouldered the old shotgun and found another Axark teenager less than 40 yards from him. The shotgun let out a soft, whirring click as its internals shaved the top layer of the block of the ferrous materials into hundreds of tiny flechettes again. and Newton's third law exerted itself into Jason's shoulder as the weapon's magnetic accelerator sent them into and through the nearest enemy. He didn't have time for as many shots as the last time he'd stopped. He couldn't afford not to put down the enemies closest to him. 4. He dropped 4 of them. Ruby-red droplets of blood glittered in the alien sunshine and splattered across the vibrant green of the brush. Isis Magdalene had ceased to say anything, instead letting out small panicked squeaks as she tried to reckon with the violence she bore witness to. Jason took her by the wrist again and, without words, pulled her along in another desperate sprint. The ground flew beneath their feet. Jason sprayed streaming in the wind like a scarlet banner. Isis Magdalene's raven-black hair fanned out in dark spray behind them, and their pursuers ate up the scant ground between them in their larger adolescent and adult strides. A cold chill shot up Jason's spine as Isis Magdalene let out a shriek of pure terror, and he felt her wrist tug against his grip. He heaved on that wrist, and pain crept into a shriek. He could worry about that later. An enraged, snarling roar tore from his throat as he pivoted and brought the shotgun to bear one-handed upon the adult Exarch grub victim that had taken the fistful of the companion's hair. He had promised her. Blood stained the ground. A short half-step behind that enemy was a corrupted and controlled Exarch man, who sent a fist crashing into Jason's forehead. Jason pivoted and threw his hips into Isis Magdalene to toss her behind him and away from the enemy. He moved to take up the shotgun in both hands, but another fist from an adult man sent him staggering backward. The shotgun spun through the air. Cal's old hunting knife, deer antler scales, were in his fist. Its blade was in his foe's belly once, twice, thrice, and again until the poor soul had been sent to his rest. The stock of the dark gun glanced off his shoulder. He was still roaring. The blade of Cal's old knife flashed. Blood stained the ground. He had promised her. A sanguine fist closed over Jason's pale throat. His feet left the ground. The knife severed tendons in that wrist, and he crashed down bodily and drew the knife down to the grub's victim's thigh. He thought he could hear Vincent howling. Something buffeted the left side of his face. The world spun. His legs shook. Cal's old knife plunged into another enemy. Something wet dripped down Jason's face. He had promised her. Jason raised his left arm to block the stalk of the dark gun sailing towards his head, and pain lanced through his body as he felt his bones snap. Cal's old hunting knife found a gap in the Exarch host's ribs. Vincent was more than a man. He was wrath made manifest. Magak pistol akimbo, he charged into the rear of the pack of grub hosts assailing his nephew and their guest. His blood was fire, his mind was ice, his heart was thunder, and his soul was justice. Here were men and boys forced by an abomination to watch as their own flesh committed evil after evil, crime after crime, sin after sin, and powerless to stop any of it until the foul creatures finally consumed the last of them from the inside. And such things had laid hands upon his family. This could not abide. Vincent didn't bother counting. He just shot the things until they stopped moving. He called them to battle with an ancestral howl of challenge. They had touched his kith. They had touched his kin. They had touched his human. They had touched his own. He was uncovered the well of paternal love, and that by rights it poured out now with wrath of a patriarch, seeing his own assailed. A Magak pistol went dry, and he didn't bother reloading. He dropped into the ground and drew a revolver in the blink of an eye, making a roar all 6 times at a half as many heartbeats, before that, too, was upon the ground. His other Magak pistol went dry, and another revolver was roaring. This could not abide. There was the haft of his tomahawk in his left hand. Its blade severed a grub from its host as the revolver in his right killed another. The revolver roared twice more before it too joined its mate among the brush, and Vincent finally ran his eyes over the enemy to count how many remained. 5. The spike of his tomahawk sunk into the host's chest. 4. A low snarling growl rumbled past Vincent's bared fangs as he advanced on the small cluster, still focused on the stumbling and staggering form of his nephew. The boy's left arm dangled at a sickening angle, and blood stained Cal's old knife in his clenched fist. Isis Magdalene stared wide-eyed at his back in mingled wonder and horror. The George boy sank to a knee, and one of the hosts tried to dart around him to take Isis Magdalene. Vincent watched the boy fling himself to the ground to pin the host's foot to the ground with Cal's old hunting knife. This could not abide. No longer encumbered, Vincent dropped to all four sprint and closed the 30 yards between them in a snarling flash. He drove into the roll and sprang to his feet and sank the blade of his tomahawk through the grub and into the back of the host's skull, sending both dead to the green brush carpeting the ground in a grotesque spray of red. A chunk of skull stuck on the blade as Vincent yanked it away to send its spike into another's host's throat. He hadn't so much pulled it free as tear it through the flesh of the poor man's throat as he swung the blade into the jaw of a third host. He swung his head to and fro, looking for the final blow, and his eyes went wide as he recognized the final host had taken aim at him. Hundreds of tiny flechettes tore flesh away as they passed through the grubs from behind, and Jason panted, "I didn't hear no bell," from where he lay with an old R&I surplus shotgun. The tomahawk fell to the brush with a thud, and Vincent found himself leaning over Jason's broken and battered form, reaching towards him with trembling fingers. "Oh, Jason, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," the kid said thickly. "I held them off." Jason went limp as Vincent picked him up, and he swallowed his fear to say, "Little lady, pick up our weapons and follow me." Slew so many, though it pained him. He slew, and slew for my sake," she was muttering as tears streamed down her face. "Hey," Vincent snapped to get her attention. "We can't stay here, and we might need to fight again. Pick up my weapons and follow me." Isis Magdalene picked herself up with a sniffle and began to brush off her dress before she thought better of it and stumbled off to collect the scattered weapons from the field of carnage. Vincent ran a short calculation in his head and realized that Jason had nearly made it back to the long way despite the pursuit. "Good job, Chief," he told the unconscious boy before he called to Isis Magdalene. "We're not far, maybe 10 minutes at a fast walk." End of story. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.